You were taught that money is just a tool, a neutral thing, a convenient bridge between what people want and what they can trade. But history tells a darker story. Money has never been just about exchange. It has always been a way to organize trust, enforce obligation, and concentrate power. Because the moment a society decides what counts as money, it also decides something else. Who gets paid? Who must pay? Who can store safety? And who is left exposed when the system begins to crack? That is why monetary change is never only economic. When money changes, taxes change. Debt changes. Armies move. Empires expand. Households break. So here is the real question. If money were only money, why did every major shift in monetary history reshape the structure of society itself? Why did changes in coin, paper, credit, and debt so often redraw the lines of trust, survival, and control? Because money was never just currency. It was always social order in disguise. Money looks neutral. That is part of its power. A coin, a note, a bank balance. Each appears to be nothing more than a unit of value, a practical measure, a clean way to compare one thing with another. But money has almost never been neutral in practice. It travels with obligations attached, with taxes due, with debts enforceable, with laws behind it, with institutions deciding what must be accepted and what can be refused. That means money does more than measure value. It measures authority. Because the thing a society calls money is never just the thing people prefer to trade with. It is the thing that can settle obligations under an accepted order. The thing that can satisfy the tax collector, pay the soldier, honor the creditor, protect stored wealth. And that changes everything. The moment money is backed by law, force, and trust in institutions, it stops being a simple market tool. It becomes a map of power. So when we study money, we are never only studying prices. We are studying who has the right to demand payment and who has no choice but to comply. So the question is not why people trade. People have always traded. The deeper question is why nearly every organized society eventually needs one thing to stand in the middle of that exchange. One accepted medium, one shared measure, one recognized settlement. At first, that sounds simple. A common medium makes trade faster, cleaner, more efficient. But that is only the surface. Societies do not create money only to speed up barter. They create money when they need to standardize obligation. A harvest must be counted. A rent must be due. A tax must be collected. A soldier must be paid. A promise must still matter after the two people who made it have gone home. That is when money becomes more than convenience. It becomes a way to measure claims, store commitments, and enforce order across distance and time. In other words, money appears when a society no longer wants exchange to depend on memory alone. It wants records, predictability, compliance. And that is the shift we have to understand. Money did not rise only because markets needed help. It rose because power needed a system. To see this clearly, we have to go back to the beginning. Ancient Mesopotamia did not build its order around abstract markets. It built it around land, grain, temples, labor, and obligation. Grain was stored, rations were counted, debts were recorded. What mattered was not just what people owned, but what they owed. Temples and palaces stood at the center of this world. They were not only religious or political spaces, they were accounting centers. They measured harvests, tracked dues, and turned social obligations into records that could outlive memory. That changed everything. The moment obligation could be written down, it could accumulate. A bad harvest was no longer just a bad season. It could become a lingering claim on the future. And Mesopotamian rulers understood the danger early. If debts kept piling up without limit, farmers lost land, families lost freedom, and the social order itself began to tear. So from time to time, rulers declared debt cancellations, not as generosity, but as survival. Because long before money promised freedom, it was already being used to hold society together.
Then money took on metal, and power took on a sharper edge. Silver and gold coins did more than simplify exchange. They standardized authority. A stamped coin was not just a piece of metal. It was a public claim. This weight, this purity, this issuing power can be trusted across distance. That changed trade, but it changed something even bigger than trade. Once rulers could mint standardized coinage, they could do what loose local barter and scattered obligations could not. They could pay soldiers on time, collect taxes in a uniform form, provision armies far from home, move resources from village to city to frontier. Coinage made empire portable. A soldier did not need personal trust in every town he entered. He needed coin that others were compelled to accept. That is the deeper story. Metal money helped merchants, yes, but it helped states more. Because the same coin that crossed a market stall could also cross a battlefield. And once money could move in formation, measured, stamped, and forcible, power could move with it. This is where money begins to look unmistakably imperial. Not just a medium of exchange, but a tool of discipline, taxation, expansion, and organized force. This is the turning point. A currency does not become powerful only because people find it useful. It becomes powerful when a central authority makes it necessary. The clearest example is tax. The moment a state says taxes must be paid in one specific unit, that unit stops being just another medium of exchange. It becomes a requirement for survival inside the system. Now the farmer needs it. The merchant needs it. The laborer needs it. Not because each of them freely chose it, but because the structure above them did. That is the hidden mechanism. A ruler does not need every village to love his currency. He only needs them to need it. And once that happens, demand for money is no longer voluntary in the ordinary sense. It is built into law, obligation, and enforcement. This is why money can hold power far beyond its material worth. A coin may be silver, a note may be paper, a digital balance may be nothing but entries on a screen. But if that is what settles taxes, secures legal payment, and protects you from penalty, then its power comes from the system behind it, not from the object itself. If money were only precious metal, this system should have failed. But medieval England gives us a stranger answer. For centuries, the English crown used tally sticks, pieces of wood cut with notches to record payment and obligation. Then the stick was split lengthwise. One half stayed with the crown, the other went to the payer. The two halves matched only each other. It sounds primitive. In some ways it was. But that is exactly why it matters. A tally stick had no gold content, no silver weight, no intrinsic beauty. And yet it could circulate, settle claims, and carry trust across time. Why? Because what people trusted was not the wood itself. They trusted the system that recognized it. The tally stick worked because it was tied to the fiscal authority of the realm, to taxes, dues, and the crown's ability to honor recorded obligation. Its value lived inside an institutional memory.
That is the surprise. Money does not survive because it is physically impressive. It survives because an accepted order can verify it, enforce it, and remember it. Which means a kingdom could run for generations on split sticks of wood, so long as trust in the structure behind them held.
Then the scale changed. What had once been local obligation became state finance. And once states learned to borrow in a structured way, money became tied to something even more powerful than tax: debt. This is the early modern shift. Governments no longer had to wait for today's harvest, today's silver, or today's tax receipts to act. Through bonds, banking, and organized credit, they could pull future resources into the present. That changed the logic of power. A war could be funded before its costs were collected. A navy could be built before the treasury was full. An empire could move before the bill arrived. This is why debt mattered so much. It did not merely finance states. It expanded what states were capable of doing. Banks, bond markets, and public credit turned future labor, future taxes, and future production into spendable force now. And from that point on, money was no longer just a record of value already earned. It became a claim on value not yet produced. That is the foundation of the modern financial order, a system built not only on what exists, but on what can be promised, priced, and owed in advance. This is the real break in the story. The biggest turning point was not that money became paper. It was that money became a promise. And that promise was backed, expanded, and enforced by power. That is a far more consequential shift. Once money rests on promises, it no longer moves through society as a simple object passed from hand to hand. It moves as a chain of claims. A banknote is a claim, a bond is a claim, a deposit is a claim. And behind those claims stands a structure deciding which promises will be honored, which losses will be delayed, and who will carry the cost when the system strains. That is where modern money becomes social force. Because now money does more than circulate. It allocates burden. Through interest, it rewards those closest to capital. Through taxes, it distributes the cost of state action. Through inflation, it quietly transfers pressure across the whole social body. And that changes how people live. The saver, the debtor, the wage earner, the taxpayer, each now occupies a different place inside the same monetary architecture. This is why the modern system feels structural. Its pressures are not accidents. They are built into the promise itself. This is where the system stops feeling abstract, because money does not enter society evenly. Those closest to its creation receive the advantage first. Banks, states, large borrowers, asset owners. They get access before the full cost spreads outward. Everyone else meets the system later. The wage earner meets it in rising prices. The saver meets it in shrinking purchasing power. The debtor meets it in interest that compounds faster than relief. And the household meets it in the slow feeling that income is moving, but security is not. That is how monetary design becomes social inequality. Not all at once, not always dramatically, often quietly. Wealth shifts before most people have language for what is happening. Assets rise, rent rises, daily necessities rise, and those living closest to cash, wages, or fixed income are pressed first. This is why inflation is never just about prices. It is about who can escape pressure and who must absorb it. Over time, that creates something deeper than temporary hardship. It creates dependence on credit, on refinancing, on state support, on the hope that the next adjustment will arrive before the next bill does. And once a society starts living like that, money is no longer just shaping markets. It is shaping the emotional structure of everyday life.
History becomes most revealing when money starts to fail. Not fail by accident alone, but fail because the center is under pressure and changes the currency to preserve itself. Rome did it by debasing coinage. Less silver, more illusion. The stamp remained. The trust inside it thinned. Revolutionary France did it with paper promises tied to confiscated land. At first, the system seemed workable. Then issuance outran confidence, and money multiplied faster than belief. In wartime America, greenbacks showed the same tension in another form. A state can create money to survive a crisis, but the question never ends there. Who absorbs the distortion afterward? Who pays through price shifts, through uncertainty, through the rearranging of social claims? That is the pattern. When central power is strained, money is often stretched to keep the structure standing. But society pays the difference. Not just in inflation, in mistrust, in broken contracts, in prices that stop meaning what they used to mean. And when that happens, monetary weakness becomes something larger than economic disorder. It becomes a fracture in social reality itself. And this is where history stops feeling distant. Because you do not live outside the monetary system. You live inside it. It reaches you through wages that struggle to keep pace, through house prices that rise faster than patience, through interest rates that decide whether a future feels possible or delayed, through public debt that expands in your name, through bailouts, stimulus, and money creation that arrive as rescue at the center and pressure at the edge. This is the modern pattern. Asset prices can rise while purchasing power weakens. Paper wealth can expand while daily life feels thinner. A balance sheet can look healthier than a household. And that is why so many people feel something is wrong before they can explain it. They are not imagining the pressure. They are living inside a monetary order that distributes gain, delay, risk, and relief unevenly. Your paycheck is part of it. Your rent is part of it. Your mortgage rate is part of it. Your savings are part of it. So the real lesson is no longer historical alone. Money is not a backdrop to modern life. It is one of the systems deciding what modern life feels like.
At this point, the deeper pattern should be visible. Money is not just a medium. It is an architecture of trust and power. A society can live with many kinds of money: metal coin, paper note, ledger entry, digital balance. History has seen all of them. What it cannot live with for long is a monetary order that hollows out belief while pretending stability still exists. Because once money stops carrying trusted meaning, something larger begins to weaken. Contracts become thinner. Sacrifice feels less shared. Burden feels less legitimate. And the distance between those protected by the system and those exposed to it becomes harder to hide. That is when money stops acting like a public language and starts acting like a political wound. Not immediately, not always dramatically. Sometimes the breakdown begins as a mood, a low-grade distrust, a sense that effort no longer converts into security the way it used to. And when a monetary system distributes pressure badly enough, long enough, people do not just lose purchasing power. They lose faith in the fairness of the order itself. That is the real danger. A civilization can survive imperfect money. It struggles to survive discredited money. Because when trust thins, authority hardens. And when both fail together, order begins to come apart.
So the argument is not that money is unimportant. It is that money has never been only money. It has always decided more than exchange. It has decided who is protected, who is discounted, who can store security, and who is forced to carry the future in the form of debt, taxes, inflation, or uncertainty. That is why monetary history matters so much. It is never just the story of coins, paper, banks, or policy. It is the story of how societies assign trust, how states organize obligation, how power travels, how pressure is distributed, and how ordinary life is shaped by systems most people are taught not to see. Some monetary orders can absorb strain. Some can stretch trust without breaking it. Others look stable right up until the moment belief begins to thin, and then the fracture spreads far beyond finance. Because once money loses legitimacy, the damage never stays contained inside markets. It moves into contracts, into politics, into class relations, into the emotional life of households, into the moral language of a civilization. That is the final lens. If you want to understand whether a civilization is durable or fragile, prosperous or brittle, look at how it defines money. Because money is where trust becomes structure, and structure decides what survives.